Okay, well, welcome to this webinar on Extranet Security Optimization. This is episode 3 in a series. We're going to be doing 7. We've done a couple already, and this is number 3. And we're Premier Point Solutions. And I'm Jeff Cate. I'm the president of Premier Point Solutions. We've been rotating doing these webinars amongst me and my colleagues, and today's my turn, and I'm glad to be here and looking forward to talking to you about this particular topic. And today's topic is how can we have a SharePoint Extranet without storing external users in Active Directory? And we've at Premier Point Solutions, we've worked with SharePoint-based extranets for many years. We have a add-on called Extranet Collaboration Manager that's an add-in to SharePoint on-premises 2007, 2010, 2013, and 2016. And I'll be showing a little bit of that, but we'll also be talking about a lot of things that you can do in SharePoint on-premises that are possible to do without even an add-on to utilize it as a really great business extranet platform. So in today's webinar, we're going to hone in on the extranet user management part of the puzzle and how you can handle setting up and managing accounts for external users. And by external users, I mean people that are outside of your organization, non-employees, people like vendors and customers and other business partners that your business needs to securely and privately collaborate with on an extranet basis. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And of course, the platform I'm going to show is SharePoint. I'm going to show a SharePoint on-premises server, and I'll get to that here in just a minute. And then we will be showing some of the features that our Extranet Collaboration Manager product brings to the table. So with that, that's all my slides. Let's jump right on into to the demo. And by the way, you can feel free to type any questions you have in the questions box of the GoToMeeting control panel at any time. I won't be answering questions until the end of the presentation, but we'll save time there to answer any questions that you have. If you want to ask a question at any time, you can go ahead and type it into the question box, and that way you don't have to remember it. It's in there, and we'll address that as soon as the presentation is complete. So what we have here is a little demo virtual machine that I have. It happens to be running in our data center, but it could as easily be running in Microsoft's Azure or Amazon's Web Services, AWS. It's a single server SharePoint farm. It is running SharePoint 2013 Foundation, and the reason I'm using that is because it's really fast, so it works great in demo environments because I can zip through things quicker than if I was using a larger farm. Now, everything that I'm going to show can be done in SharePoint 2010, SharePoint 2013, SharePoint 2016 on-premises, and this is restricted to an on-premises deployment. This is not something that works in SharePoint Online, Office 365. We're working on a solution that we hope to launch in the next few months that will offer some of the functionality you see here in the SharePoint Online environment. But right now, this is restricted to on-premises. It also works with Foundation or server. So pretty much anything on premises that you have SharePoint related, what I'm going to show you in this webinar is applicable. So what we've got here is I'm going to be doing everything with 2 browser screens. And on the left is going to be, let's see if I can get that to size properly. Yeah, that's better. On the left is going to be, I'm logged in as administrator into the SharePoint. Currently, what you're seeing is Central Administration. On the right will be the demo part that I do, logging in as various different users, and I'll be logging in as an internal user, like you would if you were on your local area network inside your corporate office and you were connecting to your SharePoint intranet. And I'll also be logging on as if I was an external user, for instance, a customer that you were collaborating with in a private extranet site. I'll be logging on and showing you how it works as an external user. So just try to keep that in mind. Left side is me logged in as an administrator. Right side be logged in as various different internal and external users, kind of demonstrating the differences and the way everything works. So over here on the left, what we're seeing is that we have a couple of web applications in this SharePoint farm. The first one is just a bare bones intranet web application, and you're probably familiar with that. That's where we store all our content that is internal content, not intended to be shared with outsiders. And in a minute, we'll log into that and show the login experience just to kind of refresh everybody's mind on how that is designed to work. And then we also have a second web application that is an extranet web application. And we've created these separately because in our fictitious company here, AW Bikes, we feel like it's important to separate internal content that is only ever supposed to be viewed by internal people versus content that is available on the extranet and that we intend to securely share with one or more business partners. So two web applications here, and you can see they have two different URLs. You can see that for the intranet, it's just simply, intranet is the URL. For extranet, you can see that it's got a fully qualified domain name, and that name is accessible over the internet, and of course it's using SSL to encrypt all communication and everything there. So let's quickly review how intranet accounts and authentication work. Well, I'm going to pop up, see if I can get that to size right. Yeah, that looks better. I'm popping up Active Directory users and computers here. So if we're just talking about an intranet, in most cases, in most companies, the way it works is each user in the company, each employee, internal user gets a Active Directory account, and that's typically part of the onboarding process for users. And these accounts are made using this, created and managed using this interface, Active Directory users and computers. And usually it's by someone in IT or some group in IT that is designated as the AD administration team. And in Windows networking, as you know, the Active Directory is the centralized account store that has username and password in it. And pretty much all applications, whether it's SharePoint or Exchange or Link or whatever you might be using, communicate with Active Directory to verify that a user can be authenticated. And by authentication, I mean they can type in their correct username and password and get into the application regardless of what it is. Now, so let's just review quickly in SharePoint terminology, or look at example of logging into an intranet and authenticating against Active Directory. One of the accounts that was in that list when I had the Active Directory user and computer screen up was Brenda, awbikes/Brenda. So here in Firefox, let's say that Brenda wants to log into the intranet. So she clicks her link to the intranet. She gets a pop-up box saying authentication required. Now, she might not get that if she was using Internet Explorer or Chrome, because they have a feature called integrated authentication, which would take her, log into her desktop computer and automatically log her into SharePoint. So that's one of the reasons I'm using Firefox here, is I always want to see, let you see what kind of authentication really is required and how that works. So Brenda is trying to log into the intranet. She's getting this pop-up box, which is in technical terms is called the NT challenge response box. And so she enters her domain, you know, pretend that Brenda is inside the four walls of the corporate headquarters, and she's connected directly to the local area network, and she's wanting to log in using Firefox to the intranet. So she types username, password. When she clicks OK, SharePoint is communicating with the Active Directory on the network that we saw a second ago, and is saying, hey, is Brenda a user? And sure enough, she is, and she was able to successfully log in. So that's how it works. You know, that's the standard experience that hopefully everybody's pretty much used to. And this is the way SharePoint started. I go way back. I go back to the 2003 version of SharePoint. This is the way it all started back in the beginning. SharePoint was primarily an intranet related product. Now, so what if we use this approach for our extranet? Is that sufficient? In other words, could we, on our Intranet Web Application, could we come in and keep getting my thing resized on me here? Oh, that's the wrong thing, sorry. Can we come in and add our external users to Active Directory and handle it that way? So they get pop-up boxes, they would use a domain in their username and password, and the answer to that is we could, but most organizations prefer not to do that for a number of reasons. One reason is that means that the AD administrators in your organization are going to be further burdened by creating and maintaining accounts, not only for employees, internal personnel, but also for everybody that you want to collaborate with in your SharePoint Extranet. So usually that's a non-starter in most organizations. Another problem is that many security departments within organizations say, you know, we don't really like the idea of having internal and external user accounts in our corporate Active Directory. There's some ways you can separate the two, but generally speaking, that's not something that is recommended or is a popular way to go. And then lastly, that pop-up box, the Windows Challenge Response Login box, is not a great user experience over the internet for the people that you're collaborating with, your extranet users. And in some cases, it can actually be blocked by different firewalls and stuff. So anyway, the bottom line is using this authenticating against Active Directory for external users is just really not a good approach to enable a SharePoint extranet. So let's look at what the preferred approach is and what it looks like, and how it works differently. Let me close. I'm going to sign out as Brenda here. Close that out. So on our extranet site here, we have configured something called forms-based authentication and the ASP.NET SQL membership provider. And that's a mouthful, and I'm not really going to want to get into all the technical details of that, nor would you want to hear me talk about all the technical details of that. But bottom line is that ships and has shipped with SharePoint since the 2007 version, and that's the way that you can really enable SharePoint as the foundation, the fundamental building blocks to be able to enable SharePoint to handle extranet use case really well. So the first terminology I mentioned was forms-based authentication. And here's a screenshot I took when I created the Extranet Web Application. And you can see in this screenshot that SharePoint, Microsoft, does refer to using that terminology. It says here, if you have just created a forms-based authentication web application, which is what I did when I created the Extranet Web Application, you will need to perform some additional configuration steps. Then they give you a link that you can go check out about how to do that. Unfortunately, in my environment, that link is broke. I think it's probably broken in many versions of SharePoint. You can do some Googling and find some information on Microsoft's site, but I'm going to show you a better source of information for how you would do that. And then also when you create, this is another screenshot from when I created the Extranet Web Application. When you create it, there's an option here. You can see here that I enabled Windows authentication using Intel M. So this is the standard, and this is the way our intranet site was set up that I just did the demo there with Brenda logging in. But there's a second authentication choice that can be made, and that would be to enable forms-based authentication and use the ASP.NET membership provider. So that's the two key buzzwords that go together to make all this work really nicely. Enable forms-based authentication and use the ASP.NET membership provider, and then you fill some values in here. Now, in our Extranet web application that we're going to be looking at here in just a second, not only is this top part enabled, but this box is enabled as well. And so I'll be able to show you what the differences are. In general, what we're talking about here is that there's users, we can allow two different types of authentication in this SharePoint Extranet. We can allow internal users to authenticate with Windows authentication. We can allow external users to authenticate or log in using forms-based authentication and the ASP.NET membership provider. Okay, one more thing about that. There's a page on Microsoft's site. It talks about using the ASP.NET membership provider, and I'm not going to get in, certainly not going to get into the technical details here, but one of the things it says down here that's important is that the membership feature requires using a SQL Server database to store the user information. So that's important to know because your internal users would be stored in Active Directory like we just showed, and your external users though would be stored in this special SQL Server database. Let me pull that up, just show you real quick. So we have that here. We have it created. We called it Extranet Directory, and it's got a number of SQL Server tables in it that relate to things like users and roles or groups and membership. And this is a standard table format that Microsoft includes with the ASP.NET. It's on all your SharePoint servers. There's a script on all your SharePoint servers that can be run that will automatically create this database in the correct format. And everything that is sensitive in here is automatically encrypted. And so this is a Microsoft technology that they developed. And this is where all your external user accounts would be stored if you use forms-based authentication and the ASP.NET membership provider. Okay, hopefully I didn't lose anybody being too technical there. But so how do you set all this up? It's a little more involved than just checking this box and filling out these two values. In fact, it's a lot more involved in that. And well, I feel like the best resource on the web is we've we've done this for so long, we've been involved in this for so long that we've got some really good detailed blog posts, step by step, about how you do it. And we've got a new one that was just created by a colleague of mine, Mark Lewis, in February, just recently, and it's on our blog. And basically, it steps through everything that you have to do as a SharePoint farm administrator to get this set up. And it definitely takes some time and some debugging to make sure you've got it right. We also have a 2013 version that is been out there since 2012, long time, and has been used by many organizations to set this up and configure it in their environments. Now, with that said, at the end of both of these articles, one thing it'll tell you is there is an easier way to do this, and the easier way would be, rather than all the manual configuration that's required, would be to use our add-in, Extranet Collaboration Manager, and use its setup wizard, and that wizard would go through and do all these manual steps for you automatically, and it does it throughout a entire SharePoint farm. And because to set this up, you have to touch each server and make some configuration changes on each server. And so that's what I've done in this environment. Our plugin, our add-in, if you have it, section gets added in central administration to general application settings. Hopefully I can get there fairly fast. You can see this section here, Extranet Collaboration Manager, gets added, and then there is a setup wizard, and when we get to the setup wizard, we're able to choose a web application. In this case, I chose the Extranet one, and there's some boxes that they're actually just 4 boxes that have to be filled out. And then once that's done, you click on create, and everything that's in those 2 blog posts, all the technical details, is done automatically. So it makes it really super easy to get your SharePoint farm set up to be able to for an extranet scenario. Now, just as a side, if you want to get to those blog posts, you can go to our website at www.premierpointsolutions.com, and you can click on this link up here in the top blog and get there. Also, this webinar and the previous 2 in this series and the ones after this are always on our YouTube channel. So you can just come to our www and find YouTube up here, and they'll take you straight to our YouTube channel where all the recordings are of these. All right, so now that I've pulled you through all the pain of talking about forms-based authentication and the ASP.NET membership provider, let's look and see, well, what is the difference for this? We'll flip back here so that doesn't flash at us. What is the difference, different experience if we're trying to log into the Extranet Web Application, where we have forms-based authentication configured? What's the user experience difference in it versus the intranet experience that we saw? So let's look at that. I'm going to bring Firefox back up. And I've got a link here to the AWBikes Extranet, which is that URL, extranet.awbikes.com. And notice now that we see something completely different. We don't get a pop-up Windows challenge and response box. Instead, we get a web page which looks like a form. That's where the name forms-based authentication comes from. Now we've got a form to log in to a SharePoint site. And this form actually has 2 sections. This section from the username down to the sign-in button is intended for external users. So this would be your customers or partners that are not employees, not in Active Directory. They would use this part of it. Then there's a link at the bottom that says sign in using Windows Authentication. So most of our customers, this is a page that we provide as part of our add-in, and most of our customers will brand it and change some of the words on this to make it look like, you know, theirs. And so that's one of the reasons why we ship it as kind of a plain looking bare bones. So many of them will change this bottom link to say employee sign in. So the employee would click on that, then they would be, if they're using Firefox, they would be prompted like Brenda was earlier to enter their Active Directory domain and account and password. But external users, and that's what we're going to log in here, we're going to log in as Fred at xyzcorp.com. External users use the form, and which works better because they're hitting this SharePoint site over the internet. This web application has been securely published via, through your firewall, so they're able to hit this page over the internet, and we don't want a pop-up logging box for that. So let's see what the experience is for Fred. Now, our product also includes multi-factor authentication, and that's turned on in this case. So he's going to need to request a code, and we've got this one set up to send the code by email. So the way this works is that Fred would then click on request code. It'll send the code to Fred at xyzcorp.com. He would get the code in his email, then he can enter it into this authorization code box, then he can actually enter his password here and log in. So let's go ahead, and now the other option is that the codes can be sent via text message. We just haven't turned that on for this particular one because it's easier for these demos to do it with emails. So I'm going to request a code, and we've got this hooked up here to a little email system, so that we can go ahead and get that. And it looks like that his code is 695543. Make sure I got the right one. Yeah, that's from yesterday. Let me close that out so I don't get confused. There's another one. That's probably from yesterday too. Okay, so I think I said, what did I say? 695543. I think that's what it is. So I'm going to do PASS. I better not tell his password, although that's no big secret because this is a demo. And so now, assuming that I've got the authorization code right and the password right, Fred should be able to sign in. And boom, so Fred's in. So that is a pretty nice login experience for an extranet users, especially if we've taken the time to brand that login page, which is completely doable. If it looks like you know, a nice welcoming login page for our organization, that really makes it a lot very nice. So hopefully there you can see the difference between using Windows Authentication in Active Directory and using forms-based authentication and the ASP.NET membership provider. Hopefully you can see what the user experience is there. And of course, Fred is stored in the SQL database that I showed you a minute ago. And if I come back over here to Administrator, and as administrator, I go to this extranet site. One of the things I can do is I can go to site settings, and I can come down, and there's a section in that called extranet management. This is something that our add-on adds, and I can click extranet users, and I can actually go see Fred's account. This is being shown out of that SQL database. So we've got Fred in there. I can see when it was created, when his last login and last activity was, when he last changed his password, and then there's the possibility to approve and lock and unlock accounts. So one nice thing about this is, if I have shared a lot of content with Fred, maybe multiple sites, and all of a sudden Fred has left XYZ Corp, one easy way to make sure Fred can never log in again is by selecting him and coming up and doing approve, deny user, or even delete user. And then no matter where we've shared content with Fred, he will no longer be able to access any part of that, and he can't authenticate. He can't log in to our extranet. So now one question you might be having is, well, how do we add new users, add external users? Well, there's a couple of ways. One way is based on who you give the permissions to. They could come in here and go to users and say new user, and then they could fill out a form with email address and password and all that information. But that's not a whole lot different than what your AD administrators might be resistant to having to do. You're just passing the buck on to a SharePoint Extranet administrator. So most of our customers don't take that approach. Instead, most of our customers use a feature that we include called invite users. So it's real easy. You just you can give permissions to this to anyone you want. By default, it's just administrators, but you can give it to others, and whoever you give it to can come in and say, Milo at xyzcorp.com is a person, a customer that I need to be able to collaborate with securely, and I want to invite Milo to join our site and collaborate with me, create an account. Click Save, and then Milo will receive an email message like this, and these can be completely brandable too to make them look like your organization, and tell Milo that, hey, you've been invited to register for access to the AW Bikes Extranet site, and he's got a link here to register. So let's do that real quick, but before we do that, I'm going to log out over here so we can do this as Milo. So now Milo says, yeah, I want to register. So he clicks on the link, presumably he's at his company and doing this from inside his firewall over the internet. And he gets a nice registration form, and he can come in and register, choose his own password, and fill in a recovery question answer and some metadata that we ask him for. And he needs to provide us with a phone number, a mobile phone number, if we're going to use text messaging for multi-factor authentication. So he fills that out and he clicks Finish. And depending on whether we have approvals turned on or not, he may be able to get his account created and accepted right away, and then he could continue on to the login. Of course, we don't need to go through this again because I already showed you how that would work once. Now, so here, by sending out an invitation, we're putting the burden on the external user to create their own account, but yet we have control over who gets to create accounts, and we have total control over the management of external user accounts, which is done back from this interface over here on the administrator side. If I refresh this, you'll see that Milo's account now appears in the list, and we have complete control. We can come in here and do any of these things, change his password, delete him, approve or deny him, add him to roles. We can do all that from here. So I've gone a little bit longer than I intended to, but hopefully you got a good overview of what's involved with setting up an extranet in SharePoint and what the user experience is. So I'm going to stop here and go to questions and answers. So if you have any questions or answers, now would be a great time to type them into the questions box. I see there might be some in there. Let me pop that out. Okay, Melanie ask, if on the Extranet website we have specific folders that we want a user to access, how do we secure this folder to only that login account? Well, that's handled through SharePoint Permissions, which SharePoint Permissions works exactly the same regardless of the type of account someone uses to authenticate to SharePoint. So when you set permissions in SharePoint, it's for an account. That account could be an Active Directory account. It could be a forms-based authentication account, or it could be something called a trusted identity provider account. And it's no different. The procedure is no different. You can set those using SharePoint standard permissions interface. You can set permissions on any level of object, site, library, folder, or item. Now, the more you set unique permissions, the more complicated your overall permission strategy and management becomes. So, good question, Melanie. Robin asks, is there bulk add users into the extranet? We do have a tool that it's a spreadsheet and a PowerShell tool that would allow you to bulk add users into your extranet database. Now, of course, when you do that, you are going to be choosing their password, and then you got to inform them of what their password is. In some ways, it may be easier for you just to send out invitations because you can send out invitations in bulk because you can paste in as many email addresses as you want into that invitation box. Good question, Robin. Robin also asks, can extranet users be part of a SharePoint approval workflow? And the answer to that question is, that's one I hadn't thought about in a long time. I believe that is the case, but I'll probably have to research that just to make sure, and I'll email you, Robin, just to make sure and let you know on that. I want to say yes, but I think there has been some questions in our ticketing system over the years asking about some people stating that there's some problems with that, and so I just want to make sure I get that right. So I'll email you, Robin. Good question. Well, that looks like all the questions, and unless somebody else has one, you feel free to jump in and throw it in there. Here's our lineup for the series. So we're here on Wednesday, February 21st. How can we have a SharePoint extranet without storing external users in AD? Hopefully, you got the gist of that for my presentation. And next time up in 2 weeks. On Wednesday at the same time slot, we're going to have how can we ensure customer A and customer B are separate. So that is a very important question. If you're going to have an extranet and you're going to collaborate with customers, most of our clients it's really important to them to make sure that customer A's content and what we're sharing with them is completely separate and not accessible by customer B. So tune back in on March the 7th and we'll give you some details on how we recommend making sure that that's the case. If you have any questions, feel free to, there's our contact information, our phone number. Of course, you can get all that from our website, www.premierpointsolutions.com. My email address is jeff@premierpointsolutions.com. You can feel free to email me with any questions. Thank you very much. Sorry that I ran over a little bit, but hopefully it was useful to you, and look forward to having you in another webinar. Have a great day.